Hey everybody, it's Mr. Hefner again. Probably be pretty weird if you logged into one of these videos and it wasn't Mr. Hefner since it's my course. But today we are going to take a look at a speech. We've looked at a few speeches in this course and we'll continue to look at a few because they were very important, obviously. And we're going to be looking at a very famous speech by Patrick Henry. Most Americans are familiar with the give me liberty or give me death expression, even if they don't know that it came from this speech by Patrick Henry. I'm coming to you today in front of Patrick Henry's house. Actually, it's a rebuilt version of his house, but I thought it was an appropriate place to deliver the lesson from today. So we're going to get into the speech. We'll go over a few techniques, literary tools, and things like that, and then I'll give you a chance to read the speech, and I've placed some audio with it as well. So if it makes it a little easier to read a difficult speech while you're hearing an actual orator deliver the speech, hopefully that'll be of some help. All right, so here we are. Patrick Henry is our author for today. He gave this speech. The speech was not written down at the time. It was taken down by people later on. They said they were in tears when they left the Virginia Convention where he delivered this speech. And it's called The Speech in the Virginia Convention. Not a very good title, but if it wasn't written down, he didn't give the speech a title. And what we're going to be looking for today is we're going to be looking for how he uses rhetorical elements. Now, rhetorical, this word right here, you guys know that when you talk about something called rhetorical questions. We'll talk about that, and that's actually going to be one of our literary terms for today. But rhetoric is the strategy of organizing your ideas and connecting them in such a way that you make an effective argument. So we're going to look at how Patrick Henry urges the members of the Virginia Convention to move towards revolution and get involved in the battle, in the war that is about to get started with Great Britain. And we're also going to look, as always in this unit, philosophy and the Enlightenment. In other words, where do these ideas from the thinkers that we studied come into play? And the fact that this is a persuasive speech. So speeches could occur in a number of different modes. They could be narrative, they could be informative. In this case, they're trying to get people to take action, and so that would be persuasive. A little bit of background, and I'm not going to quiz you on the history of Patrick Henry, but it helps to know a little bit who this fellow was. He was born in Virginia, so he could have served as president once the United States became the United States. He was educated at home, but that wasn't unusual for those days. It wasn't like they didn't like the public schools. There just were not public schools at that time. Through his own education, he managed to get his law license, and then he joined the Virginia House of Burgesses. So let me just explain what that is. Today we know that a house is a legislative body. At this time for Patrick Henry, we don't have any burgesses, I don't believe, in the United States. The Virginia House of Burgesses was a local governing body by authority of the king. Since Virginia was still a colony at that point, any kind of government, self-government especially, wasn't really self-government. It was with permission of the Parliament and with the permission of the king. He was elected governor of Virginia a whopping 5 times. So he was certainly popular with the people. And he was a conservative federalist. What that means, so those of you guys who have listened to the music from Hamilton, you know that it wasn't long after this country was formed that political parties quickly followed. And your original parties were your Democratic Republicans and your Federalists. The Federalists in this case believed that there should be a federal government, that we shouldn't just have a loose association of individual states all agreeing to help one another out when they feel like it. And yet he was a conservative Federalist. And so he believed in the importance of states' rights and of balancing things out. And so that's going to affect some of his action as we go along. He was so popular with the locals, he was invited to attend the Constitutional Convention to form the very body that would make the United States, and he turned that down. He was offered to run for the United States Senate and serve in the national legislative body, and he turned that down. He was offered the cabinet position of Secretary of State. He turned it down. Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States. Now that is like the ideal job. That's a position for life. And you're the Chief Justice. Turned it down. And when it came time for a 6th term for governor, he decided he didn't want that as well. Now, his relationship with the Bill of Rights is rather interesting. So after the Constitution was ratified, there were groups of people who started to believe that, well, maybe we need to specify certain rights that states or anybody can't take away from other people. Let's make a list of those rights. Other people started to worry, well, if we make a list of rights, does that mean that anything that's not on our list of rights can be taken away? And so there was this, how do we do this right? Now, we know today that we have this thing called the Bill of Rights. It was the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution. Originally, though, 12 amendments were proposed to the United States Constitution. Henry was against, just kind of supporting them as they are, even though he was in favor of having them. So what happened was Virginia approved all 12, and only 10 actually made it. But Patrick Henry's involvement in getting a Bill of Rights to become real, he literally drove that. He didn't write it. James Madison, I believe, usually gets credit for being the primary author of the Bill of Rights. But Patrick Henry definitely was one of the influencers, so that what we have today is to a large extent a result of his actions. All right, let's see. Patrick Henry's best-known speech is the one we're going to take a look at today, but there is some confusion. And I know sometimes you get answers wrong on a test, and teachers are like, well, didn't you study? Sometimes this stuff is really complicated. And in this particular case, your textbook got it wrong, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So this speech that he's given was delivered to the Virginia Convention on March 23rd, 1775. So by 1775, British troops are in America. There are squabbles going on. The Continental Congress is meeting. We just don't have a Declaration of Independence yet by 1775. And like I said, this speech was recorded down years later from the memories of people who heard it. So exactly how close it is to what Patrick Henry actually said is somewhat spurious. But in American literature, it is what we have sort of accepted. Now, here's where your book makes a mistake. Your book says that this speech was prompted by the Stamp Act. Well, the Stamp Act was about a decade before. And by the time Patrick Henry gave this speech, the Stamp Act had already been repealed. Now, it is true that one of Patrick Henry's other famous speeches was a speech in which he railed against the Stamp Act. And we had talked about that one, and I'm sure you remember it from American history. The Stamp Act was a tax put on paper, and the monies were going to be used to pay the debt that the British incurred during the 7 Years' War, or as we call it, the French and Indian War. He did give a speech on the Stamp Act, but the famous "Give me liberty or give me death" speech was actually in response to the Intolerable Acts, and we talked about that. So after the Boston Tea Party, the King and Parliament passed the Intolerable Acts, which completely restricted the rights of people in Massachusetts to govern themselves. A lot of people in Virginia at the time are like, well, it doesn't bother me. Everything's fine here in Virginia. I don't want to get involved in any kind of a revolution. And Patrick Henry had to argue that if rights are being restricted in Massachusetts, it's only a matter of time till our rights get get taken away here in Virginia as well. And when is it going to be easier to start a revolution? When we have rights and we can sort of be in the advance of anything, or after our rights have been taken away and this country is full of British soldiers. And so he was really one of the first people in Virginia to be arguing in favor of the American Revolution at this time. Less than 1 month after he gave this speech, war did in fact break out with the shots fired at Lexington and Concord. Now, I cannot show this to you because for some reason anything on biography.com is blocked here at school. But if you want to learn a little bit more about Patrick Henry, there is a really awesome 45-minute biography. It was originally in the old days of the A&E channel, going back probably more than close to 30 years anyway. There was a documentary about him on biography. They've made the whole thing free on their website, but because it's a television streaming site, they get blocked here through our servers. So at school, you won't be able to see it. At home, you may. It all depends. If you're using your school laptop, sometimes the things that get filtered whether you're here or not. So you might have to check it on another device. But you could just go to biography.com and then search Patrick Henry, and it'll be the first thing that comes up. This oil painting that you see over here on the left, that is actually an oil painting of Patrick Henry delivering his Stamp Act speech. And in your textbook, it's paired up with this speech because I don't think we have any oil paintings of Patrick Henry delivering the "Give Me Liberty" or "Give Me Death" speech. So I added it here. But that is actually an artist's kind of rendering of Patrick Henry delivering his earlier Stamp Act speech. All right, so one of the literary terms for today is going to be rhetorical question. And there's a big explanation there with examples. You're going to see plenty of rhetorical questions in the speech. It's in fact, I think the greatest body of the speech is made up of rhetorical questions. But here's what's important about rhetorical questions. All right, they're easy to see that they're questions because there's a question mark at the end. But most times when you use a question mark, you want an answer. You want somebody to respond. Now, some people have this idea that a rhetorical question is a question that you're not supposed to answer. That's wrong. That's not accurate. A rhetorical question is a question that has such an obvious answer that there's no need for anyone in the room to say what it is. And so instead of telling people a fact, you ask them a question that leads them to understand right away that that fact is in fact a fact, okay? So it's a very powerful way of arguing a point because you just ask questions and you make your point in the listener by all those unspoken answers. So you are supposed to answer a rhetorical question. You're not supposed to speak it out loud because the answer is up here and it's so obvious no one needs to speak it out loud. Now, the other thing is coming up in almost everything we're doing in this unit, the idea of enlightenment again. So we're going to think back to those Enlightenment thinkers that we studied at the start of this unit, and we're going to look for some of the ideas that Patrick Henry puts into this speech because everybody's hot on the Enlightenment at this time. Okay, you're going to go into Schoology and you're going to find the link for the speech. And at the top of the page where the speech is, there's a link that I put there that says, listen to the speech. If you click that link, you'll be able to read along as you listen. And because it is a speech, it's much better to hear it than it is to read it anyway. Speeches are written in a special way so that they work better with a listener. If I read a complex paragraph, I can stop and think and go back and reread. But if I listen to a speech, I can't stop and think. The speech goes on without me and I'm lost. And I can't re-listen unless it's recorded, and you couldn't do that in his days. So that's why the speech is going to use lots of emphasis, lots of rhetorical questions, and you're going to find that, he sets up his reason at the beginning, the entire body of the speech supports that reason, and he's going to summarize it at the end. Speeches have to do a better job of driving home the points that they're addressing. So as you read, look for the literary tools. Rhetorical question is one of the ones specifically for today, but also look for allusion. Allusions are when you compare something important to something people already know to help them get a better understanding of it. Emphasis. Emphasis can be done a number of ways. It can be done by repeating, or it can be done by taking an idea, taking it apart, examining the parts, putting it back together, and giving examples as you go along. Look for metaphor. Metaphors, again, are a type of allusion. Allusions are types of metaphor, actually the other way around. But metaphors, again, are taking bigger ideas that people can relate to help them understand the specific ideas of what you're discussing right now. There's a little bit of personification in here. Now, this is pretty obvious, but personification is when you give human characteristics to non-human things. Every ship captain does it when he talks about his ship and he says, she's doing fine out here on the sea or something. Anytime you refer to a ship or a country as a she or as the fatherland, you're giving it human characteristics. So look for his technique there. And aphorisms are important too. Aphorisms are going to be these wise sayings that he's going to throw in here as he gives the speech. All right, and of course the Enlightenment, which we're going to do that everywhere. So when you're finished, you should be able to talk about rhetorical questions. You should be able to identify some from the speech, and you should be able to give the question, and then I like how they put this, what is the assumed answer? What is that answer that's so obvious that everybody realizes it and nobody has to speak it out loud. And then the Enlightenment, which I've talked about a whole bunch of times here, but what ideas from the Enlightenment do you see in this speech? Now, if you're watching this video online, this is the point where you want to stop the video. You want to go find the speech, read through it, and then come back here for the check for understanding question. Because it's a video, I'm going to assume you did that, and I'm going to go on right now. So let's assume we've just finished the speech. Here we have some true and false questions. Number one, in this speech, Patrick Henry asks for an end to the American Revolutionary War. True or false? He asks for an end. And that's obviously false. It hasn't even started yet. It starts with the first shots being fired 1 month after the speech. He's actually saying, let's get it done now. How about number two? Patrick Henry delivered the speech in protest of the Stamp Act. Believe it or not, your book wants you to say true, but I've already corrected that. So this is false. This speech was given in response to the Intolerable Act, not the Stamp Act. 3, Patrick Henry says that he'll follow the orders of the King of England and that the purpose of the speech is to ask that the orders be fair to the colonists. No. He says clearly in this speech, we have tried everything. We have tried everything, and nothing has worked. So that's false. And I actually slipped up. You saw the last answer. But in case you weren't paying attention, Patrick Henry argues that peace is not worth giving up freedom. And of course, that's absolutely true. What Patrick Henry is saying here is that freedom is more important than anything. And if you're willing to just settle to have peace and give up your freedom, that's a grievous error. In fact, Ben Franklin, similar idea. Ben Franklin was famous for saying those who would give up essential liberties for a little peace deserve neither one. They deserve neither peace nor liberty. And then the last one, Patrick Henry believes God supports the efforts of the colonists. Here's a little tip. Throughout all of human history, when someone is trying to convince other people to get involved in a war, God is always on your side. Nobody ever says God will be against us, but let's do it anyway. Nobody ever says God is on the side of our enemy. And Patrick Henry, like everyone else, says God will be on our side when we enter this. All right, now here's something else. We're gonna look for which ones are personification, metaphor, or rhetorical question. Number one, I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that is the lamp of experience. What would that be? Personification, metaphor, or rhetorical question? All right, that is a metaphor. In this case, there is not really a lamp, but just as lamps they guide us through the dark as we walk, guide our feet, all right? In this case, his experience is what's going to guide him through the darkness of this unforeseen war that's up ahead. How about number two? Mr. President, it is natural, and when he's saying Mr. President, he's saying addressing the President of the Virginia Convention. There is no President of the United States yet. Mr. President, it is natural to man to indulge in the illusions of hope. We are apt to shut our eyes against the painful truth and listen to the song of that siren till she transforms us into beasts. This one's really, again, it's a difficult question for a multiple choice like this. And I would say you can pick either A or B for this one. And here's why I would say you could choose either A or B. A, because when he says, listen to the song of that siren till she transforms us. In this case, he's giving human characteristics to the idea of deception here, the false hope that people have right now, that it'll work out okay. England's our parent country. She'll take care of us in the end. He says that's a she, a false siren. But it's also a metaphor, because in Greek mythology, the sirens were these, they were creatures often depicted with the bodies of birds and the heads of women. And they sang a song that was so alluring that sailors sailed their ships toward them until their ships were dashed upon the rocks. Okay? And so we have a metaphor using the Greek concept of what a siren is to teach people about false hope, but we've also used a female voice, so it's also really personification. I would not put that question like that on a test. I would clear it up first. Number three, is this the part of wise men engaged in a great and arduous struggle for liberty? And right away you're supposed to be, no, of course it is not. And that's what makes it a rhetorical question. So that would be C. Now, You can't guess rhetorical question just because there's a question mark. Not all questions are rhetorical. But in Patrick Henry's speech, I'd have to look at it, but I believe they are all rhetorical. He's not asking any actual questions. Number 4, they are sent over to bind and rivet upon us those chains which the British ministry have been so long forging. And of course, that's a metaphor. Nobody's coming with actual physical chains to put on the ankles of the American colonists. But at the same time, he believes that little by little, the British are taking away the personal rights, the freedoms of Americans. And to take away their freedom is like putting these metaphorical chains on them. And then number 5, sir, we have done everything that could be done to avert the storm, which is now coming on. And avert means to avoid, and avert the storm would mean to avoid the war that's coming. Everybody's been through a storm. Many of these people he's speaking to have not been through a war. So when you try to take something people know, a storm, and relate it to something new, the war, that's called a metaphor, once again. All right. Now, we're not going to go over these now. I just want to show you what I'm going to expect you can do at some point after you read this. I want you to be able to identify some rhetorical question and then be able to explain what is the point being made by that rhetorical question. And I've given you 3 right here, but you'll find a whole lot more than 3 as you go through the speech. Okay, so that's our introduction to Patrick Henry. What you want to do now, if you haven't already done so, you should have stopped the video, but if you didn't, go into Schoology, find the link for the speech, read the speech. At the top of the speech is a link that will allow you to listen to a professional orator deliver the speech as you read along. Look for the rhetorical question. Listen for ideas of the Enlightenment. And look for those techniques of speech which make it more effective when people are listening, like emphasis, repetition, elaboration, those sorts of things. All right. Enjoy Patrick Henry. I'm glad you're going to get a chance to hear the entire speech. Most people know just one sentence. And I'll see you next time.